a fireside chat titled From Tradition to Transformation, the Future of Diversified Sharia Investments, where we have the privilege of hosting two esteemed personalities, Tan Sri Wahid Omar, Chairman of Bursa Malaysia, and Encik Khairi Shahrin Arif Baki, Deputy Chief Executive Officer and Head of Global Sales at CGS CIMB, to deliver this thought-provoking discussion. I would like to now invite both speakers to join us on stage.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum. And welcome, Tan Sri, to Invest Shariah Conference 2023.
Thank you.
Dear audience, my name is Khairi Shahrin, and I will moderate this session with our esteemed speaker, Tan Sri Abdul Wahid Omar, Chairman of Bursa Malaysia. Tan Sri, it is a great honor to have you with us this morning. Thank you so much for taking this time.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you.
All right. Before we go straight to our topic, let's talk a bit about the man himself here. Tan Sri Wahid Omar is regarded as one of the most accomplished corporate leaders in Malaysia, having successfully led as CEO three major organizations in infrastructure development: UM in the early 2000s, telecom in 2004, and financial services, Maybank, starting in 2008. He served also as a group chairman of Pemodalan Nasional Berhad (PNB) from August 2016 to June 2018. Following his completion his term as a senator and minister in the Prime Minister's Department in charge of economic planning from June 2013 to June 2016. Prior to his cabinet appointment, Tan Sri was a president and CEO of Maybank, where he was credited with transforming Maybank into a regional banking group and a global leader in Islamic finance. Tan Sri, for most of us here, it is our dream to have a career like yours. From your early days in Bumiputra Merchant Bankers, that was back in the 80s, Amanah Capital in the 90s, and then you were managing director of UEM at the age of 37, CEO of Telecom Malaysia at the age of 40, and later as the CEO of Maybank. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, he achieved all this before the age of 50. In fact, for a few years of my life, I was under the leadership of Tan Sri too. About 15 years ago, in the way we crossed paths, Tan Sri was at Maybank, and in fact, together with my current CEO, Puan Azizah as well. And so let's go to our topic. The Invest Sharia. The topic is From Tradition to Transformation, the Future of Diversified Sharia Investments. And our theme for today, Navigating the Sharia Horizon, Diversifying Investment Frontiers. So first of all, Tan Sri, maybe you can share with us your career journey from the days of Bumiputra Merchant and later on at Amanah Capital, in terms of your involvement in Islamic finance and Sharia investment. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kari, for the very, very kind introduction. I'm feeling a bit embarrassed now. So I can't hide my blushness, if you like. Now, let me begin by welcoming all of you to Bursa Malaysia, since this actually held here. And as Chairman of Bursa Malaysia, it is my pleasure to see so many familiar faces in this room. Thank you for making it this morning. Thank you, Puan Azizah, staff, for the speeches. And thank you, Mr. Yong Yun Fat, for being here as well. At the table, we spoke about the second and third name of Mr. Yun Fat. So for many of us who are familiar, sounds familiar with Chow Yun Fat. But anyway, that could be another career for you on another occasion. So if I may, basically, on my personal side, I've been privileged and very fortunate to have had a very fulfilling career. And a big part of that has been in Islamic finance, one way or the other. So, Shariah mentioned about my earlier career at Merchant Bankers. That was actually at the time when I first had the taste of Islamic finance. And one of the projects or project financing that we were working on at that point in time was to raise money for Shell MDS in Sarawak. So at that point in time, they wanted to raise some capital, and we structured it in the form of an Islamic bond. So those were the days when buy Bita Manajil was still acceptable as a structure. So we actually used that, and that the Islamic bonds or Sukuk was the first Islamic bond ever issued in the world, amounting to about 125 million ringgit. So again, privileged to be part of that process. Then my second tour of duty in the financial services world was with the Amanah Capital Group. And at that point in time, Amanah Capital Group is a diversified financial services group and property, and involved in many aspects of financial services, including from the basic leasing, factoring to finance company operations. Of course, Amanah Merchant Bank was there, Amanah General Insurance, and so on. So in our workings, as much as we were involved in conventional financing, we always made it a point to offer alternative Sharia compliant products. So I think the other would be for every single financing product that we have, we must try to make sure that we have an Islamic equivalent. So one of the first things we worked on was factoring, where we introduced the first Islamic factoring again in the world at that point in time. Of course, factoring is a small subset of the financial sector, but the fact that we were able to come up with such structure bodes well for the Islamic financial services in Malaysia. And again, of course, at that point in time, it was very much based on the principles that were allowable at that point in time. It was based on by Al-Dain, the debt trading side. But I think the idea was try to explore all the possibilities and be as creative as possible. So that's my second tour of duty. And my third tour of duty in financial services obviously was at Maybank. And again, very happy to have worked with you and Azza and some of the others in this room as well. Now, in Maybank, the challenge was more pronounced. So, of course, we were competing greatly with CIMB and Public Bank and others. But one of the things which we felt we could make a real difference and a huge impact was in Islamic finance. Now, one of the things that faced many of us Muslim management members at a point in time, when we moved from other organizations to a bank, for example, there is always that question about the source of our income. So for many Muslims, obviously having your income coming from riba is obviously an issue. And then that triggered us to think about what we can do to help promote Islamic banking or Islamic finance further. And I think at a point in time, naturally, we already have the Islamic finance running parallel to the conventional finance, but it is done either by dedicated entities like Bank Islam and Bank Muamalat, or by subsidiaries of conventional banks like Maybank Islamic and CIMB Islamic, RHB Islamic, and others. Now, the initial model was to have it completely independent. Then later we were allowed to leverage on the network of the branches. But when that started, it started as Islamic banking being a subset of the conventional banking. So meaning that if you were to walk into any of the bank branches, whether it's Maybank or CIMB, so it's a conventional branch, but with an Islamic window, right? So we felt that, look, that being the case, you will always see Islamic banking as a small subset. So then we said, look, what if we were to invert it around? And we were very much inspired, Kari, by the concept of the supermarket. Now, if you're familiar with the Tesco supermarket, which used to operate here until they sold to Lotus. So Tesco supermarket in UK, so they have a small halal section, right? But when Tesco operates in Malaysia, the whole supermarket is halal, but with a small non-halal section, pork section, and the wine section, right? But the rest of the supermarket is halal. So in the past, you walk into a Maybank or CIMB branch, The whole branch is actually conventional with a small Islamic window. Then we inverted it. So walk into any Maybank branch, automatically you'll be given Sharia compliant financing. But if you still require conventional financing, then there is a small conventional window, right? So when we adopted that Islamic first strategy being the default, because at the end of the day, when customers go to the bank, they don't necessarily say that I want Sharia compliant Islamic financing per se. They just want, I want a loan or financing to buy a house. I want a loan or financing to buy a car or working capital financing and so on. So by adopting that, I suppose, strategy as default, we found that majority of the customers were willingly accepting the default Sharia compliant product, and that has resulted in the Islamic banking assets growing much faster than the rest. So I think when Maybank did that, Alhamdulillah, we saw Maybank leapfrogging the other competitors to the extent that if you look at the last year's financials, I think with 280 over billion ringgit of total assets. So Maybank Islamic is now the biggest Islamic bank in Malaysia. It's 3 times bigger than Bank Islam, and it's the 5th largest Islamic bank in the world. Now, the good thing is actually all the other banks have similarly followed that kind of approach. I mean, Stanbic, RHB, even Hong Leong. And that has contributed to the success of Islamic banking and finance in Malaysia, such that today, 44.5% of total financing in Malaysia, the whole banking system is already Sharia compliant. So I think to me that's actually a very good strategy and approach, which I hope can be adopted by other Sharia compliant businesses. So I think one of the things that we see lagging behind is the takaful industry, right? So in terms of penetration rate, takaful as a percentage of the total insurance in the system is actually only about 20%. So it's low. So I think that's something, hopefully it will inspire others. And like in Sukuk as well. So I think, Alhamdulillah, when it comes to the need to raise long-term debt capital, fixed income, I think the default approach has been, if there's a way of structuring it in the Sharia compliant way, we'll issue Sukuk. And again, this has contributed to the Sukuk advancing very well, contributing towards Malaysia now being the biggest Sukuk market in the world. And as you know, in terms of Sukuk outstanding, I think it's about 40.3% of global Sukuk outstanding in Malaysia. And in terms of the actual issuance for last year, I think it's about 43.3%. So I think the point I would like to make here is that it's not about the personal journey, but it's about how we've all been able to contribute with relevant approaches and models to make Islamic finance a success here in Malaysia and put Malaysia certainly at the forefront at the global stage, if I may. Thank you.
Thank you, Tan Sri. Maybe we can also touch a bit during your stint in PNB, where I believe you made, I think there's about 5 pillars, and one of it is on the Islamic side, right, or on the Sharia side. Maybe you can elaborate a bit on that one, Tan Sri, as well. Thank you.
Yes, well, thank you, Kari, for that. So one of the challenges PNB had at that point in time was that in terms of the classification of ESB and ESN, whether it's Sharia compliant or otherwise, whether it's Harus or Halal, if you like. Now, there was already a pronouncement made by the Muzakara, so this is the National Fatwa Council, effectively, to say that the investment in ESB, ESN, and the funds managed by PNB, they are Harus, right? But at that point in time, there were 2 states that did not agree. There was actually Penang and Selangor. So the 2 state fatwa committees said that no, it's not. So one of the first challenges that we had was to convince the two state fatwa committees that indeed investments in SBSN is actually harus. So what we did was to completely review our investment portfolio, and we found that among others, although it's merely Shariah compliant, there were and typically, PNB does not invest in any gaming stocks. But at that point in time, we still had a small portfolio in tobacco stocks. Then we said, look, let's get rid of all these tobacco stocks altogether from our portfolio, and leaving only all the Shariah compliant plus the banking stocks. I'll come back to that a bit later. Now, when it comes to fixed income instruments, at that point in time, we were still investing in conventional bonds. Then we decided, look, okay, let's gradually reduce our holding in the commercial bonds. And from that moment onwards, only subscribe to sukuks and so on. So completely convert that. And of course, naturally, placements also, there were some issues that some placements were, placed with conventional banks as opposed to Islamic banks. So that was also changed over time. So gradually, and making sure that we still comply with our credit risk limits and so on. So over time, we demonstrated that, look, okay, when it comes to money market instruments, fixed income instruments, they were all 100% Shariah compliant. So the only challenge would be in the case of equity portfolio. Now, in the case of equity portfolio, if you look at our market here, so we have a market capitalization of 1.7, 1.8 trillion ringgit today. And the biggest stocks are the financial stocks. So whether it's Maybank, Xiaomi, Private Bank, RHB, Hong Leong, and the rest. So they make up, I think, collectively about 30%, so one third of the market capitalization. And as you know, banks are the main drivers of the economy, main facilitators or catalysts for the economy. And for any portfolio that's not invested in financial services, then it will affect the returns of that portfolio. So what we contended then was that although 75% of the portfolio was Shariah compliant, but the balance 25%, you still have no choice but to invest in some of the banking stocks, and including Maybank stocks. And as you know, PNB and the funds held by PNB are the biggest shareholders of Maybank, for example. So that's when we presented a case whereby it was actually under the concept of Daruriyah. So we have no choice but to be invested into banking stocks, including Maybank in particular. But as a matter of direction, the intention was to encourage banks like Maybank and CIMB and others to continue to increase their Shariah compliant businesses in their portfolio. So, and with that kind of mission and intention, we were then able to convince the fatwa committees of both the states of Penang and the Selangor to issue the fatwa that it is actually now harus. Now, just to demonstrate that movement, so because PNB was in a position to actually encourage the management of Maybank to pursue the Islamic first strategy, so Islamic financing in Maybank now makes up more than 60% of Maybank's total financing in Malaysia. So it's already majority Shariah compliant, if like. So I think that gave the comfort to the fatwa committees to then change their fatwa to see that investment in ASB and ASN is harus. And of course, they also gave further conditions that PNB must continue to increase the Shariah compliant portfolio, from that 75%, and further higher. and that's something which PNB management, as I understand, continue to comply and pursue. Yeah.
Thank you, Tan Sri. I think that's a huge contribution to PNB. It has about 14 million clients actually across Malaysia, so that helps all of us actually in so many ways in terms of the harus and make it more Shariah, right, than it was before. But that was your all your previous experience. Maybe now we move to your current position as a chairman of Bursa, and as you know, the market has evolved a lot over the last 15 to 20 years. And how do you see the role of yourself and Bursa, and then the landscape that has changed so much? Maybe you can share a bit on that. That's
Sure.
yeah.
Obviously, here at Bursa, Bursa has done a lot in terms of promoting development of the capital market in general, equities market in particular, and Islamic equities market as one of the main priorities. So naturally, when it comes to equities, one of the first things that we did obviously was to encourage more Shariah compliant equities stocks, right? So I think alhamdulillah, so we have more than 800. So 80% of our securities listed on Bursa Malaysia, they're now Shariah compliant already in terms of number, but in terms of value, it's still about 2/3, right? So that's progression, and that's because of the banking stocks, which I talk about, and I'll come back to that a bit later. So that's actually one in terms of the types of securities that's listed on our exchange. I think secondly, in terms of providing the platform, the Islamic platform for people or for investors to invest in a Shariah compliant way end to end, right? So the whole from your ordering, your trade and settlement, clearing, everything. So end to end is basically that Bursa platform that we introduced. And of course, so with that, we have also converted Bursa Malaysia itself to make sure that our income therefore comes from Shariah compliant streams, and Bursa itself is now a Shariah compliant stock. So that's actually on the equity side. So on the derivative side, so obviously we also would like to have features that our derivative contracts are all Shariah compliant. And then as we move to Bursa Suk Al Sila, which is important, which is the commodities trading platform to facilitate the development of Islamic banking and Islamic finance, for them to undertake. So this will be the underlying contracts for many of the commodity products offered by the banks and so on. So I think so that has grown tremendously in terms of the value of transaction, and I would say that the majority of Islamic banking assets would actually use our commodities commodity murabah trading platform already. Now, the same principle is then applied to our other products. Now, at Bursa Malaysia, we would like to, as you know, our vision is to be ASEAN's leading sustainable and globally connected marketplace. The term that we use actually marketplace as supposed to be an exchange, but the idea would be for us to be the marketplace for many classes of assets. So it's what we call the multi-asset class exchange. And so from your equities, derivatives, commodities, murabah platform, trading platform, and then looking at the Bursa Capital Market and others as we move along. So on Bursa Capital Exchange, again, by design, we made it to be Shariah compliant. So this is the first Shariah compliant carbon credit that's actually introduced in the world today. And as we move forward, obviously, we also looking at development of Bursa Gold Dinar. So again, it's actually to facilitate investment by people into digital gold that can also be exchanged for physical gold as well. again, it will be done in the Sharia compliant manner. So again, in all our operations at Bursa Malaysia, underlying that will always be the Sharia compliant element, if like. Yeah.
Thank you, Tan Sri. Just to add to that, a little bit of advertisement. CGS also, we have our, we call it Sharia compliant futures for the global, which you wait for it, but the launch will be done sometime later this month, and it's actually the first done and it's a support of Bursa as well, actually, for us to offer not just commodities in Malaysia, but the global commodities also in Sharia. Okay, thank you, Tan Sri, for that. Maybe also we want to hear a bit more on the sustainability. I think, it's been a buzzword. Of course, another buzzword is on the AIs and everything, but on the sustainability, on the ESG, and the role that Bursa is playing, and then how it interlink with the Sharia products that we have today, Tan Sri.
Right. Well, thanks, Gary, for that. So obviously, this is a huge subject, and we can spend hours talking about it. But maybe I can break it down into two parts. One is within the context of the bigger picture of ESG, and secondly, in terms of what we're doing specifically at Bursa in relation to that, and that includes the sustainability reporting framework and so on. So on the first part, I think it's important for all of us to truly embrace ESG in spirit and in substance, because sometimes we tend to get overly technical, right? So I think make no mistake that if you're running a business, you must embrace sustainability in your strategy and in your business operations, because if you don't, you're not going to survive for long, because in the worst case situation, you cannot be part of the global supply chain, and customers, young people in particular, they are very conscious about the sustainability issues. And if your products are not sustainable, they will not buy your product. So, of course, banks will not give you money, and investors will not invest in you. So I think make no mistake that there is no option for survival. You must embrace sustainability. Now, then it comes to comprehension, because again, sometimes I feel that people tend to look at this superficially. I think it's important for us to truly understand what's the makeup of sustainability. There are three components of environmental, social, and governance. Now, when it comes to governance, I think we all know we've been spending years talking about corporate governance, and I'm not going to touch on that. On social issues, issues about forced labor, modern slavery, issues, social equity, and so on, that has come to light during the MCO, when a number of our glove-making companies and plantation companies were slapped with a withhold release order by the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency. Now, that was really a wake-up call for many corporates to pay real attention to the social aspects, the forced labor and modern slavery issues. Now, I think if you ask me, our companies engage in really forced labor, modern slavery in its real sense? I don't think so. They don't. But from a technical perspective, in the past, when we hire foreign workers from other countries, and these workers will incur costs before they arrive at the doorstep of the factories and plantations and so on, all those debts were their responsibility. But under the new International Labour Organization rules, all these will become the responsibility of the employer. So imagine, so when we hire someone from Indonesia, typically the cost incurred will be about 2,500 ringgit, which is actually quite reasonable. But if you hire someone from the Indian subcontinent, from Bangladesh, for example, the cost can be as high as 16,000 ringgit, which is a lot, right? So naturally, in the past, employers could say, look, this is not our problem, but today it is the employer's problem. So I think that's come to light, and I think employers cannot ignore that anymore. And many of these companies have got to pay 60 million ringgit in total to clear off the debt bondage of these foreign workers. So I think the good things actually has come to light, and all companies are now have now taken notice, and will now make sure that all these forced labor and modern slavery issues are actually taken into account in their hiring policies and so on. So then we go back to the first part about the environmental. So I think on the environmental part, obviously the biggest two issues would be on climate change and biodiversity loss. Now, climate change is real. And I think if you've seen the increase in temperatures, in the IPCC report, the sixth assessment report, you can see that at the rate we are going, it'd be very, very challenging for we, humankind, to contain the increase in temperature to within 2% above our pre-industrial level, right? So that's the cap. Why are we looking at 1.5% or 2%? Well, that's because anything above 2% will be disastrous for the whole world, right? Because that will result, among others, in rises in sea levels. And when that happens, many places will become flooded, for example, and many coastal areas in Peninsular Malaysia included will be flooded. And that will affect many businesses. So if you have a plantation in Pulau Keri or in Port Klang or in PD and so on, if we don't contain this sea level rises, it will affect your business. So it's actually real. It's not just conceptually. It is real. It will affect. And of course, if you're a property development, your land near all these coastal areas, the recurrence of flooding and so on, it will result in loss of lives and of course loss of properties and so on. So this is real. So all countries in the world are required to commit to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. This is important to contain the increase in temperature to within 100 degrees or maximum 2 degrees above pre-industrial level. And Alhamdulillah, leading up to COP26 in Glasgow 2 years ago, 90% or countries representing 90% of the global economy had already committed to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions to zero, net zero, by mid-century. So mid-century, we talk about 2050 or 2060, right? So that's the good start. The challenge will then be about how do we get there, right? So to get there, we therefore need to understand what is our current greenhouse gas emissions level and how will it grow as our economy expands, and what can we do to bring it down, right? Now, we as a country, all countries for that matter, we are required to submit our stock greenhouse gas emissions data biannually, meaning that once every 2 years. And the last submission was in December 2022. So this is what we call the biennial update report number 4, right? So in that submission that the nation made, so we disclosed that we have total emissions of 372 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, if I recall correctly. And but we're fortunate because we have our forest cover, some 18 million hectares of forest that's able to sequester 256 million tons of carbon on gross basis, right? So 376. Sorry, I'm getting minus 256. The balance is about 116 million tons of carbon. So that's actually the net emission that we have today, right? That we need to bring down to zero. Now, how do we bring down that to zero? Of course, you have to look at what's the makeup of that 376 million tons, right? And the biggest contributor to the greenhouse gas emissions will be two sectors. the energy and transportation sectors. So these two combined on gross basis make up close to 80% of the total emissions. So that's why the Malaysian government has placed a lot of emphasis to decarbonize our energy sector. So as the government's already launched the uh, National Energy Transition Report or Roadmap, first phase, 3 weeks ago. I think that's great. And as you know, the commitment here is to not to allow any more planting up of coal-fired power plants. So that's off the table, and existing ones will will mature, will expire as we progress. And the commitment here is actually to increase the renewable energy component to as much as 70% by 2050. So that's the one big one. Second one is on transport, Carrie. Transportation, obviously, we need to do away with the internal combustion engine cars, for example. Encourage more public transportation. Look at the EV and green hydrogen. So I think these are some of the moves necessary. So the other would be to lower the emission and to preserve our forests. Remember, make sure that we don't cut down any more trees in our forests so that we can continue to sequester the carbon dioxide. So that 160 net figure will come to zero. Now, these efforts will require investment, right? So it will not come free. So how much will it cost? Well, there are numerous studies. There was one figure mentioned by the Ministry of Economy of 637 billion ringgit required. But there was a study done by WWF Malaysia and BCG to determine that the figure is about 430 to 530 billion ringgit. So about half a trillion ringgit required to be invested between now and 2050 in various efforts, including renewable energy, including carbon capture, utilization, and storage, and so on. Now, this is the 500 billion ringgit required to be invested over that period in Malaysia, which is a lot of money. But if you express it as a percentage of our GDP, it is actually only about 1% per annum. So it's actually quite affordable, if I may. Now, can this 500 billion ringgit be funded commercially? Again, in our study, about 57% is already commercially viable without any carbon pricing or without any government support. These are your solar power, it is given, right? Because government has just announced the corporate green power program, yesterday, and these are the projects where the private sector will willingly fund it without any support, without any carbon pricing. So that's given. But the balance of 33% or so, 43% will require some form of carbon pricing or some form of government support. Now, in that study, 6% of the projects will not be viable even if carbon pricing goes up to 300 ringgit per ton, right? So that means it will require other forms of blended financing and so on. But the bulk of it can be funded if there's some form of carbon pricing between 0 to 300 ringgit per ton. And that's when we have the role of the carbon market, right? So obviously, the government has yet to formulate a policy in terms of would there be mandatory carbon market and so on. But leading up to that, the government mandated Bursa Malaysia to develop the voluntary carbon market. So that's why we set up the Bursa Carbon Exchange that was launched last December. And we had our first contracts auction in March, 5 months ago, basically. And so the idea would be for us to have that carbon market here in Malaysia for carbon to be priced accordingly, so that as we progress moving forward, as things stabilize, we will have projects in Malaysia that can be partially funded by the carbon credits that's traded on Bursa Malaysia. So I think it is a progression, and that's where we talk about the ESG and role of Bursa Malaysia on the product side, on the funding side. Now, on the other aspects of reporting and so on, obviously we would like all our companies to be ESG compliant, and we started this process from December 2014 when we introduced the FTSE for Good Bursa Malaysia Index, right? So at that point in time, we started with only about 24 companies, if I recall correctly. But alhamdulillah, over time, the number has grown to more than 90 companies now. And the idea would be to encourage more and more companies to be ESG compliant. And from last year, 2 years ago, 2021, we introduced the Shariah compliant version. So FTSE for Good Bursa Malaysia Shariah Index, which started with 54, if I recall correctly, component stocks, and today we have 77 stuff. Component stocks now. So again, the idea would be to encourage more and more companies to be part of the index. Now, if I may, the challenge with the index that it takes into account the liquidity of your stocks. So this is where you have the chicken and egg situation. So if you're not ESG compliant, then institutional investors will not invest in you. So you don't have that liquidity, right? But to get into the index, you need liquidity. So which one comes first? So that's why recently we said, look, FTSE Russell, let's work on rating all the companies listed from an ESG perspective, irrespective of their trading volume or trading value, so that as they get rated, then they become investable to the institutional shareholders. So not just limiting it to the component stocks, but making sure that they're all rated transparently. And that's actually something that we are promoting. And if you go to our website, so you have a much longer list of than the 77 companies that's actually ESG compliant. And of course, we have also issued the sustainability reporting framework for all the PLCs, and we take into account their state of readiness, so meaning that for the East companies, they are given a bit more time to comply compared to the main market companies, if I may. Sorry, I've answered it in a very long way, so I thought it's important for me to provide the full context for better comprehension. So if any of you want to know more about the environmental aspects, the carbon greenhouse gas emissions, our commitment at the national level, I'll be happy to actually speak with you during the break. Thank you.
Thank you, Tan Sri. We can see how passionate Tan Sri is, when it comes to this topic. Okay, we come to close to the end of our session, but it's not, the end of it. It's just that we would like to open to the floor. If you have any questions for Tan Sri, this is a great opportunity for you to ask Tan Sri on questions related to our topic today and what we have discussed today. Thank you.
So, mic coming? Okay.
Assalamualaikum, Tan Sri. Thank you for very insightful sharings now. I just want to ask your own view in terms of what you consider as the 3 top challenges in terms of trying to transform to future diversified Shariah investment. So what are the 3 top challenges that you think is facing the Bursa especially? Thank you.
Well, thank you. Well, the top 3 challenges. Well, I think first of all, in terms of the universe, if I may, so for many Shariah compliant funds, they can invest practically in any business that are businesses that are run in the Sharia compliant manner. So meaning that so in terms of all the ratios, the source of non-halal income and so on. So I think that's easy. But as I mentioned earlier, there is actually one sector where is grossly underrepresented, and that's the financial services sector. So if you look at in terms of true Sharia compliant, the stocks in the financial services sector on Bursa Malaysia is actually very limited. So you have Bursa Malaysia itself. We have market cap of six over 7 billion ringgit, if I may. Then you have Bank Islam, which has got a market cap of 5 billion ringgit. Then you have Syarikat Takaful Malaysia, a market cap about 3 billion ringgit. And then so MBSB Bank, obviously with the acquisition of MRDF and so on, so there'll be another one. But all these combined is only about 15 billion less than 20 billion ringgit for sure, if I recall correctly. So again, it's actually small compared. It's only what 1% of the total market cap of the listed companies. Now, I mentioned earlier that even in Maybank, Sharia financing makes up more than 60% of their total financing in Malaysia. So in terms of revenue contribution and profit contribution, I think it's probably more like 40% already. And likewise, in case of CIMB, slightly below that, and RHB and Hong Leong interest. Now, we do need more Sharia compliant stocks from the financial services sector to be made available. Now, the typical solution would be, okay, why can't you list Maybank Islamic? Why can't you list CIMB Islamic? Why can't you list Hong Leong Islamic Bank, for example? So yes, that can be done, but it will result in a huge challenge in terms of the business model, because the reason why the Malaysian banks have been very successful in promoting Islamic finance is because of the leverage model, where you leverage on the common distribution channel, common credit risk people, market risk. So the whole function is actually leveraged on the group, basically, except for, of course, for the Sharia compliant aspects and so on, the end-to-end part of it. So if you're going to list the Islamic banks separately, so you will have issues about how do you regulate the arrangements between the two. When a client comes in with 100 million ringgit exposure, for example, how much do you allocate to the Islamic bank? How much do you allocate to the commercial bank? Where do you book those financing and so on? And it becomes very unmanageable, I would say. Then you begin to lose that leverage, that single group kind of model. So I think this is where we need to start thinking about, so how do we increase the number and value of Sharia compliant equity instruments in the financial services sector. So of course, number one, let's get all those unlisted ones to be listed. So we have Bank Muamalat, which is still unlisted, so let's get it listed. So we have some commercial banks that potentially can be converted into Islamic bank. So I can't name the name, but probably which one is actually best suited to be converted. I think that can be done. Help facilitate merger some of the small banks. So in a way, MBSB acquiring MRDF, I think that's actually a great move from a capital market perspective. So apart from that, we need to start to think about, okay, is there a way of getting a portion of Maybank and CIMB and RHB and Hong Leong listed in the form of a Sharia compliant equity instrument, right? Okay, so that's a question that we have to ask ourselves and start to think. I think in the past, when I was at PNB, I floated the idea of the Islamic shares for all these banks. So I think maybe it's time to revisit that. I don't know. So I think my encouragement to all of you will be to continue to innovate, to think about ways to address the current predicament or challenge. To me, that's actually the single biggest challenge. The second, I would say,